The house was perfectly still. It was that kind of deep, quiet silence that only happens in the middle of the night, usually around 3 or 4 in the morning, when the whole world seems to be holding its breath. For Keanu, this silence was the most valuable thing about his home. It was a sanctuary. It was the one place where he could just be himself, away from the cameras, away from the noise of the city, and away from the expectations of everyone else. He lay in his bed, buried under a thick, warm duvet, lost in a dreamless sleep. Outside, the sky was clear and filled with stars. There was no storm, no wind, and certainly no rain. It was just a calm, peaceful night. But then something changed. It wasn't a sound that woke him up, at least not at first. It was a feeling, a low, deep vibration that seemed to hum through the floorboards and into the mattress. It was like a heavy truck was idling right outside the window, but when he opened his eyes, he knew that wasn't it. He lay there for a moment, blinking in the dark, try to shake off the sleep. His heart gave a little thump of confusion. The humming sound got louder. It was a rhythmic thrumming noise, like a heartbeat, but mechanical and aggressive. Keanu sat up slowly. He rubbed his hand over his face, trying to wake up his brain. He looked around the room. Everything looked normal. The shadows of the furniture were still in the same places, but the air in the room felt different. It felt heavier, somehow denser. He took a deep breath, expecting to smell the usual scent of old wood and laundry detergent, but there was a new smell creeping in. It was sharp and metallic. It smelled like wet earth and old copper. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet searching for the warmth of his slippers. But instead of soft fabric, his toes splashed into something ice cold. Keanu jerked his foot back, his eyes going wide in the darkness. He reached over and fumbled for the lamp on the bedside table. His fingers found the switch, and with a click, a soft yellow light filled the room. What he saw made his stomach drop. The floor was covered in water. It wasn't just a little spill from a glass of water. It was a shallow lake stretching across the entire bedroom. The rug was floating slightly, rippling like a weird, gray ocean. Keanu stood up, the cold water instantly soaking into his pajama pants. It sent a chill all the way up his spine. "What is going on?" he whispered to himself. His voice sounded small in the strange, echoing room. He stepped carefully through the water, splashing toward the hallway. The humming sound was deafening now. It was coming from inside the walls. As he stepped out of the bedroom and into the long corridor, he saw where the water was coming from. Down at the far end of the hall, near the ceiling, a pipe had burst inside the wall. It wasn't just leaking. It had exploded. Water was spraying out with incredible force, blasting through the drywall and cascading down the hallway like a man-made waterfall. Keanu rushed toward it, his bare feet slapping against the wet floor. He knew he had to stop it. He reached the utility closet where the main water valve was supposed to be, throwing the door open, careful not to lean on it too hard, and grabbed the heavy metal wheel. He turned it with all his strength, his muscles straining, his knuckles turning white. For a second, he thought it was stuck. Then, with a screeching groan, the wheel turned. The pressure in the pipes hissed, and the waterfall in the hallway slowed to a trickle and then finally stopped. But the damage was done. The house was silent again, except for the dripping sound of water landing in puddles. Keanu leaned back against the wall, catching his breath. He looked around. The hallway was a disaster. The paint on the walls was already bubbling up, peeling away in long, wet strips. The pictures hanging on the wall were tilted, their glass covers foggy with condensation. But he didn't care about any of that. A sudden thought hit him like a punch to the chest. The basement. His eyes widened in panic. If the main pipe on the second floor had burst with that much pressure, where did the water go? Gravity pulled everything down. He realized with a sinking feeling that the water hadn't just stayed in the hallway. It would have seeped through the floorboards, running down the spaces between the walls, pooling directly underneath him. He turned and ran toward the staircase that led to the lower level. This wasn't just a basement to him. It was the heart of his home. It was where he kept the things that mattered most to him. He didn't have expensive jewelry or stacks of cash hidden down there. He kept things that were worth much more than money. He had boxes of old journals filled with his thoughts and scribbles from over the years. He had shelves lined with books that had been signed by friends who had passed away. He had his old motorcycles, which he was slowly restoring with his own hands, piece by piece. And most importantly, he had a small, fireproof safe in the far corner. It didn't hold diamonds. It held letters, photographs, and the only remaining handwritten scripts from plays he had written decades ago. Things that could never be replaced. Keanu reached the top of the basement stairs. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from a table nearby and clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, shining down the steep concrete steps. He froze. The basement wasn't just wet. It was filling up like a swimming pool. The light reflected off a dark, churning surface about halfway down the stairs. The water was already deep. He could hear the sound of rushing water below, echoing off the concrete walls. It was the sound of his memories being washed away. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stop to put on boots or grab a coat. He just took a deep breath and started down the stairs. The first step was cold. The second step was colder. By the time he reached the fifth step, the water was above his ankles. It was freezing, shocking his system, but he kept going. He moved as fast as he could without slipping. The beam of his flashlight danced wildly as he descended, illuminating the disaster. When he reached the bottom, the water was up to his shins. The current was stronger than he expected, tugging at his legs. He looked around the room, his heart pounding in his ears. The water was still rising, dripping steadily from the pipes overhead and seeping through the foundation walls. He waded through the water, pushing past floating boxes and displaced tools. The water made everything heavy and difficult. Every step was a struggle against the resistance of the flood. He could see his workbench overturned, tools scattered across the floor like toys. A stack of sheet music had fallen and was now dissolving into a wet pulp in the water. He felt a lump form in his throat. It was heartbreaking to see his sanctuary like this, but he pushed the feeling down. He had a mission. He had to get to that safe. He made his way to the far corner of the room, dodging a large plastic storage bin that was bobbing his path. The water was now up to his knees. He shone the light toward the spot where the safe was hidden. It was tucked away behind an old drafting table he used for sketching. As he got closer, he realized the water was even deeper there. It was up to his waist, soaking his pajama shirt and making his skin feel numb. The drafting table had shifted, floating awkwardly against the wall, and behind it, the water was swirling violently. Keanu reached the table and grabbed the edge, trying to pull out of the way, but it was heavy with waterlogged drawers. He gritted his teeth and pulled harder, his muscles shaking. With a loud splash, the table moved, knocking against the wall. The sound of the impact was different than he expected. It didn't sound like wood hitting concrete. It sounded hollow. He shone the flashlight into the dark gap behind the table. The water rushing past seemed to be coming from somewhere specific behind the wall. The force of flood had dislodged something. He looked closer, wiping the water from his eyes with a wet sleeve. The wall there was cracked. The force of the water pressure from the burst pipe upstairs must have found a weak point in the foundation. A large section of the drywall had buckled and burst open. But behind the broken wall, it wasn't just darkness or insulation. Keanu narrowed his eyes, leaning in closer to the hole. The beam of his flashlight pierced the gloom inside the wall. There was a space there, a crawl space that he didn't know existed. And floating there, caught in a pocket of air and debris, was something that made him stop breathing for a second. It looked like a box, but it wasn't a cardboard box that would have dissolved instantly. It was metal, and it was old. He stared at it, the water swirling around his chest. The house was flooding. His belongings were ruined. But right there, hidden in the wall behind his drafting table, was a secret that had been buried for years. He forgot about the cold. He forgot about the damage. He just stared at that hidden metal container, wondering what on earth was inside it, and why someone had gone to such great lengths to hide it inside the walls of his home. The water was freezing, a shock to his system that made his muscles want to seize up, but Keanu ignored the cold. He was focused entirely on the dark gap in the wall behind the drafting table. The beam of his flashlight cut through the murky air, illuminating the old metal container. It was half submerged in the dark, silted water that was leaking from the broken wall. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly from the chill. The hole in the drywall was jagged and rough. As he leaned in, a piece of wet plaster scraped against his arm, scratching the skin, but he didn't pull back. He stretched as far as he could, the water current tugging at his legs, trying to push him off balance. His fingertips brushed against the side of the box. It felt slick and cold, made of heavy steel. "Got you," he whispered, mostly to steady his own nerves. He grabbed the handle, or what was left of it, and pulled. The box didn't move. It was heavy, and it seemed to be stuck on something inside the narrow crawl space. Keanu gritted his teeth. He planted his feet firmly on the concrete floor, feeling the slime of the basement grit between his toes. He adjusted his grip, wrapping both hands around the edge of the box, and pulled again with all his strength. This time the box shifted. There was a loud, metallic scrape as it dragged against whatever was holding it, and then it popped free. The sudden movement made Keanu lose his footing for a second. He stumbled back, splashing heavily into the rising water, but he held on tight. The box was heavier than it looked, dragging his arms down. He clutched it to his chest, his heart hammering against his ribs. The water was now lapping at his waist, getting higher every minute. He knew he couldn't stay down here much longer. The structural integrity of the house felt uncertain, and the water was showing no signs of stopping. Turning away from the wall, he began the difficult journey back across the room. The water resisted him, pushing against his legs like a heavy, invisible blanket. Every step was a battle. He had to lift his knees high to plow through the liquid. The beam of his flashlight danced over the floating debris, his old notebooks, a toolbox, a soaked throw pillow. It hurt to see his memories floating like trash, but he forced himself to keep looking forward. He had to protect this mystery box he had found. He reached the bottom of the stairs. Looking up, the wooden steps seemed to stretch on forever, disappearing into the darkness of the upper floor. Climbing stairs while soaking wet and carrying a heavy, rusted object is dangerous even in the best conditions. With the water rushing around him, it was a recipe for disaster. Keanu took a deep breath. He shifted the box to one arm, gripping the handrail tightly with his other hand. He took the first step. His wet foot slipped on the wood, and his stomach lurched, but he caught himself. He paused, waiting for his heart rate to go down. "Easy," he told himself. "Just take it slow." He moved methodically, one step at a time. Splash, grip, pull. Splash, grip, pull. The water dripped from his clothes, forming a puddle on each step as he ascended. The air grew slightly warmer as he got closer to the main floor, but he was still shivering uncontrollably. The weight of the box seemed to double with every step. His arms burned with exhaustion, but he didn't dare let go. When he finally reached the top landing, he let out a long, shaky breath. He was out of the basement, but the house above was also in bad shape. The hallway was slick with water, and the humidity was intense, fogging up the windows. He could hear the steady drip, drip, drip coming from the burst pipe upstairs, a constant reminder of the chaos. He walked carefully through the hallway, his socks squelching against the hardwood floor, leaving wet footprint behind him. He needed to get the box to a dry, safe place. The kitchen was on the other side of the house, and the floor there was tile, which would be easier to clean. He made his way there, moving like a ghost through his own ruined home. In the kitchen, the moonlight was streaming to the windows, reflecting off the wet surfaces. It looked beautiful in a sad, tragic way. He walked over to the large island in the center of the room. He gently set the heavy metal box down on the counter. It landed with a loud, solid thud that echoed in the quiet room. Keanu leaned against the counter, closing his eyes for a moment. He was exhausted. His body ached, and he was freezing cold. He needed a towel and dry clothes, but his eyes kept drifting back to the box. It was sitting there, dripping water onto the clean granite countertop. It looked so out of place, an ancient, rusted secret in his modern kitchen. He grabbed a dish towel from a drawer and slowly began to wipe the box down. He wanted to see what he was dealing with. As he wiped away the layers of grime and slimy mud, the details started to emerge. It was definitely an old ammunition canister, the kind the Army used to use, painted a dull olive green. Most of the paint had chipped away, revealing the pitted steel underneath. There was a stenciled marking on the side, but it was too faded to read. The rust had eaten away at the corners, but the lid seemed sealed tight. He ran his fingers over the latch. It was stiff, corroded by years of dampness inside the wall. It felt like it hadn't been opened in a lifetime. Keanu felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was terrified. What if he opened it and found something terrible? What if it was something illegal or dangerous? But another part of him, the curious part, was burning with anticipation. Why was this hidden inside the wall? Why was it placed so carefully behind the drafting table in the basement? Who put it there? He looked around his kitchen. Usually, this was a place of warmth and comfort. He would make coffee here in the morning, read scripts, or chat with friends. Tonight, it felt like a crime scene investigation room. The silence of the house was heavy, pressing in on him. He knew he shouldn't open it alone. Maybe he should wait for the cleanup crew to arrive in the morning. Maybe he should call someone. But he knew he wouldn't. This was his house. This secret had been delivered to him by the flood, as if the water wanted him to find it. It felt personal. He dried his hands on his pants, leaving dark, wet streaks on the fabric. He reached for the latch again. He tried to pry it open with just his fingers, but it wouldn't budge. It was rusted shut. "Okay," he muttered. "You want to be difficult." He opened a drawer and pulled out a sturdy butter knife. He wedged the tip of the knife under the edge of the metal lid. He applied pressure, leverage working in his favor. There was a screeching sound of metal grinding against metal as the rust began to give way. The smell of old, stale air wafted up from the tiny gap he created. It smelled like dust and dry paper. He paused. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was the point of no return. Once he opened his box, whatever was inside would become real. He took a deep breath, held it, and pushed the knife harder. With a sudden, sharp snap, the latch gave way. Keanu pulled the knife out and set it on the counter. He looked at the box. The lid was slightly ajar now. A tiny sliver of darkness peeked out from under the green metal. He reached out and, with a trembling hand, placed his fingers on the lid. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, thinking about the house, the flood, and the strange way life throws mysteries at you when you least expect them. Then he lifted the lid. The metal lid groaned as it lifted, the sound echoing in the quiet, wet kitchen. For a second, Keanu just stared. He half expected to see water damage, or maybe nothing at all, just an empty, rusted space. But the box was full. It wasn't filled with gold coins or expensive jewelry, and it certainly wasn't money. It was packed tight with paper. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It was a distinct, dusty scent of old paper, dried ink and time. It smelled like a library that had been closed for 50 years. Despite the water that had soaked the outside of the box, the contents inside were miraculously dry. Whoever had packed this had been incredibly careful. The items were wrapped in layers of what looked like wax paper and plastic bags, sealed tight against the elements. Keanu reached in with a careful hand, his fingers still numb from the cold basement water. He pulled out the first bundle. It was a stack of letters, bound together by a rubber band that had long since cracked and turned into goo. The paper of the envelopes was yellowed and brittle, the edges soft from age. He set the letters gently on the counter and reached back in. His hand brushed against something hard and smooth. He pulled out a thick, black book. It was a journal, bound in leather that was worn soft in the corners. The cover had no title, just a simple, geometric design tooled into the leather. It felt heavy and important in his hand. At the very bottom of the box, there was one more item. It was a single black and white photograph, protected in a thin plastic sleeve. Keanu picked it up. The image was grainy, likely taken with an old camera. It showed a man standing in front of a house. It was this house, but it looked different. The trees were just saplings, and the paint was fresh. The man was wearing a heavy coat and a hat. He wasn't smiling. He was looking at the house with an expression that Keanu couldn't quite read. It looked like a mix of pride and terrible sadness. Keanu felt a shiver run down his spine that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. He looked at the man's face, then turned the photo over. In faded pencil, handwriting read, asterisk, the beginning, October 14th, 1989. Asterisk, he put the photo down and turned his attention to the leather journal. His heart was beating faster now. This felt intimate. It felt like he was holding someone's soul in his hands. He knew he shouldn't look. These were private things, hidden by a previous owner for a reason. but the flood had brought them to him. It felt like destiny, or at least like a responsibility to understand what had been lost in the water tonight. He opened the book. The spine creaked, protesting after decades of being closed. The handwriting on the first page was neat, architectural, and precise. It belonged to the man in the photo. I am building a fortress for a ghost. The first line read. Keanu blinked. He read it again. Asterisk. I am building a fortress for a ghost. Every beam I cut, every nail I drive, I do it for her. She will never walk these halls, but I will build them as if she might. Asterisk. Keanu sat down on one of the kitchen stools, the water dripping from his pajama pants, forming a small pool on the floor. He forgot about the damage to the house. He forgot about the cleanup crew that would be coming in a few hours. He was completely absorbed in the words on the page. He turned the pages slowly. The journal wasn't just a diary. It was a record of the house being built. There were detailed sketches of the layout, drawings of the roof trusses, and notes about the type of wood used. But in between the technical drawings, there were heartbreakingly personal notes. Asterisk. Today I finished the kitchen. The light hits the counter in the morning, just like she liked it. I caught myself turning around to tell her, but the room was empty. Asterisk. Asterisk. I found a contractor who understands a vision. He asked me why I wanted such a big window in the guest room. I told him I liked the view. I didn't tell him it's because she always wanted to see the mountain from her bedroom. Asterisk. Keanu felt a lump forming in his throat. He had lived in this house for years. He had loved the quiet of the mornings. He had loved that specific window in the guest room. He had thought it was just a good design. He never realized it was built as a monument to a broken heart. He carefully set the journal down and picked up the stack of letters. The envelopes were addressed to the same person mentioned in the journal. The name on the front was Rebecca. Keanu opened the first one. It was dated a year before the house was finished. The letter wasn't a love letter. It was an apology. Dearest Rebecca, it began. Asterisk. I write these words because I cannot say them aloud. I know you are gone. I know I was too late. I was busy building my career, building my name, and I forgot to build a life with you. I bought this land to start over, to build a home we always talked about. I am filling it with the things you loved. I hope that somehow, in the silence of these walls, you can forgive me. Asterisk. Keanu put the letter down. The silence of the kitchen suddenly felt very heavy. He looked around the room. He looked at the corners where the shadows gathered. He had always felt a certain sadness in this house, but he had thought it was just the atmosphere of an old building. Now, he realized it was the echo of this man's grief. The house wasn't just a structure, it was a confession. Every room was a plea for forgiveness that was never heard. He picked up another letter. This one was dated 5 years later. Asterisk, the house is done. It is perfect, and it is empty. I sit in the study at night and listen to the wind. I thought building this would make the pain go away. I thought if I made something tangible, something real, it would fill the hole you left behind. But it doesn't. The house is just a shell. I am just a ghost haunting it. Asterisk. Keanu felt a deep sense of pity for the man. He understood loss in a way that most people couldn't. He knew that grief wasn't something you just got over. It was something you carried with you, like a heavy stone in your pocket. This man had tried to turn his grief into a physical thing, a house, hoping that would be enough to keep the memories alive. But as Keanu read on, the tone of the letters changed. They became less about sadness and more about fear. Asterisk. I am getting old. My hands shake when I draw. I am afraid that when I am gone, the house will be sold to strangers. They won't know about the window seat. They won't know why the hallway is painted blue. They will tear down the wallpaper and repaint it white. They will erase you. Asterisk. Asterisk. I have decided to leave the journals and the letters hidden. I cannot bear to throw them away, but I cannot let them be found by just anyone. If the house ever speaks to someone the way it has spoken to me, maybe they will find them. Maybe they will understand. Asterisk. Keanu closed the journal. He looked at the rusted metal box sitting on his expensive granite counter. The flood had been violent and destructive. It had ruined his floors and his walls. But in its destruction, it had performed a miracle. It had washed away the secrets of the past and delivered them to him. He looked at the photo of the sad man in front of the unfinished house again. He felt a strange connection to him. Two men, separated by decades, both living in the same house, both trying to find a way to deal with the quiet. Keanu stood up. He needed to preserve these things. The plastic wrapping had saved him from a flood, but the air in the kitchen was humid and damp. He carefully placed the letters and the journal back into the metal box. He carried the box over to the dining table, which was on slightly higher ground and drier than the kitchen floor. He looked back at the basement door. The watered down there was still sitting, ruining his things. But it didn't matter as much as it had 10 minutes ago. The physical stuff could be replaced. The carpets could be dried. The walls could be painted. But this story, the story of the man in the house and the lost love, this was irreplaceable. He realized then that the house wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted by spirits. It was haunted by love. A love that was so strong it tried to build a home to keep itself alive. Keanu knew he couldn't just fix the pipes and forget about this. He had been given the ending to a story that had no ending, and now it was up to him to write the next chapter. He walked back to the counter, picked up the towel he had used earlier, and gently dried the cover of the journal one more time. He traced the geometric design on the leather with his thumb. "I hear you," he whispered into the empty room. "I hear you." The sound of the water dripping in the basement seemed to soften, as if the house itself was taking a breath, relieved that its burden had finally been shared. Keanu looked out the window at the starlit sky. The night was no longer just a time of disaster. It was a time of discovery. He didn't know how he was going to do it yet, but he knew he had to find out who Rebecca was. He had to find out if there was anyone left who remembered the man who built this fortress for a ghost. The search was just beginning. The morning sun finally broke over the horizon, casting a bright, harsh light on the disaster inside the house. The beautiful golden rays that usually made the kitchen feel warm and inviting now just highlighted the destruction. They glinted off the puddles on the floor and illuminated the dust motes dancing in the damp air. Keanu hadn't slept. He was still sitting at the dining table, the metal box open in front of him, surrounded by crumpled tissues and empty coffee mugs. The silence of the night was gone. By 8 a.m., the house was a hive of activity. A cleanup crew had arrived. There were people wearing heavy boots and blue jumpsuits walking everywhere. Loud fans were set up in every corner to dry out the floors, creating a constant, deafening hum. Industrial dehumidifiers were sucking the moisture out of the air. It was chaotic and noisy, the complete opposite of the sanctuary Keanu cherished. But he barely noticed the noise. His world had shrunk down to the stack of letters in front of him. A tall man with a clipboard walked into the kitchen. He was the restoration manager. He looked at Keanu, then at the wet walls, and started talking about insurance claims and drywall replacement. He pointed to the far wall of the living room, the spot where the water had poured down. "We're going to have to tear this whole section out," the manager said, his voice loud, so he could be heard over the fans. The water got behind the framing. "It's all compromised. We'll need to rip it down to the studs today." Keanu stood up quickly. "No," he said. His voice was firm, cutting through the noise. "Not that wall. Specifically, the area behind where the drafting table was." The manager looked confused. He adjusted his glasses. "Sir, the moisture meters are reading off the charts there. If we don't open up, you'll get mold. It has to go." "You can cut around the crawl space," Keanu said, walking over to the man. He felt protective of the house and of the secret it had given up. "There's a hollow section there. I don't want it disturbed. Just be careful. Please." The manager looked at Keanu's face and saw how serious he was. He nodded slowly, making a note on his clipboard. "Okay, we'll work around it, but it's going to take longer." Keanu thanked him and walked back to the table. He sat down and picked up a letter he hadn't read yet. He realized now that the letters weren't all addressed to Rebecca, the woman the architect had loved. As he dug deeper into the box, he found a separate bundle, tied with a faded blue ribbon. These were different. He untied the ribbon and opened the first envelope. The handwriting was shaky, different from a precise architectural script of the journal. "To my daughter," it began. Keanu felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest. He hadn't known there was a daughter. Asterisk, I write this because I don't have the courage to say it to your face. I know you hate me. You have every right to hate me. When your mother died, I buried myself in this house. I built walls to keep the world out, but I didn't realize I was locking you out, too. I treated this house like a temple to her memory, and I treated you like a stranger. I see the way you look at me, and it breaks my heart, but I don't know how to stop building. I don't know how to be a father to a living girl when I am still in love with a ghost. Asterisk. Keanu put the letter down. He rubbed his eyes with the palm of his hand. The story was getting even sadder. It wasn't just about a man losing his wife. It was about a man who was so consumed by his own grief that he lost his daughter, too. He read through another letter. Asterisk, you left today. I watched you pack your bags. I wanted to run down the stairs and stop you. I want to tell you that this house is just wood and nails, and you are my blood, but I stood by the window like a statue. I let you go. I am the biggest fool alive. I built this house for a family, and I drove the only family I had left away. Asterisk. Keanu looked around the kitchen. The workers were ripping up the wet flooring in the hallway. The sound of crowbars prying up would echoing through the house. It sounded violent, but Keanu felt a strange sense of peace. The house was being opened up. The secrets were coming out. The man who lived here had tried to keep everything bottled up inside these walls, hidden behind drywall and paint. The flood was forcing it all into the light. He realized he couldn't keep this to himself. These letters were an apology that was never delivered. They were a plea for forgiveness that had been trapped in a metal box for decades. They belonged to the daughter. He picked up the journal again and flipped to the back pages. He needed a name. He needed to know who this woman was. Finally, near the very end, where the handwriting became erratic and messy, he found an entry dated 5 years before the architect's death. Asterisk, I received a note today. A lawyer called. You have a daughter of your own now. Her name is Hope. I have a granddaughter. I will never meet her. I will never hold her hand. That is my punishment. That is the price of my silence. Asterisk, Keanu closed the book. He had a name, Hope, and the daughter's name. He searched back through the letters. There was no signature on the letters themselves. They were never sent, but on the envelope of one, he saw a faint imprint where a pen had been pressed down hard on a paper above it. He held it up to the light at an angle. He could barely make out the name written in reverse. Julia. Julia and Hope. He stood up. He couldn't just sit here while the house dried. He had to do something. He walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room, away from the puddles. He opened his laptop. He wasn't an expert detective, but he had resources. He knew people who knew how to find people. He typed into a search engine, asterisk, architect, name, house, address, daughter. Asterisk, he didn't know the architect's name yet. He went back to the box and dug through the bottom. Under a stack of old receipts for lumber and nails, he found a business card. It was simple, just black text on white cardstock. Asterisk Thomas Blackwell, architect. Asterisk. Keanu went back to his computer. He searched for Thomas Blackwell. He found an obituary from 10 years ago. It was short. Asterisk Thomas Blackwell, age 68. Passed away peacefully at home. He was a talented architect. He is survived by his... Asterisk Keanu leaned in. The text was blurry. Asterisk. He is survived by his estranged daughter, Julia Blackwell of Portland. Asterisk. Portland. Keanu felt a spark of excitement. It wasn't too far. He picked up his phone. He thought about calling a private investigator, but that felt too intrusive. This was personal. He decided to call a friend of his, someone he trusted implicitly, who worked in legal aid. She was good at finding people who didn't want to be found, usually to help them. She answered on the second ring. Keanu explained the situation, the flood, the box, the letters. He didn't talk about himself as a movie star. He just talked as a man who had found something heartbreaking in his basement. Are you sure you want to open this can of worms? His friend asked gently. Sometimes these secrets are hidden for a reason. They weren't hidden to hurt her, Keanu said, looking at the weeping wall in the other room. They were hidden because he was too proud and too scared to show them. She deserves to know that he was sorry. Everyone deserves to know they were loved, even if the person was bad at showing it. His friend sighed. Okay, send me the details. Give me an hour. Keanu spent the next hour pacing the house. He stepped over the cords of the industrial fans. He watched the workers carefully cut away the drywall near the basement stairs, avoiding the spot where the box had been hidden. He felt like a nervous father waiting for a child to be born. Finally, his phone rang. "I found her," his friend said. "Julia Blackwell. She lives in a small apartment in Portland. She's a librarian. She never married. And she has a daughter. Hope." Keanu closed his eyes. Is she happy?" "I don't know," his friend replied. "But she listed her father as deceased in the library records when she joined. She didn't even put his name down as an emergency contact. It sounds like there was a lot of anger." "Anger is just love that's disappointed," Keanu said softly. "Can you get me her number? Or an address?" "I can get you an address." "But Keanu, you can't just show up. That's scary. You need to write to her first. Or send the letters." Keanu looked at the box. "No," he said. "I can't just mail them. They're too fragile. And this isn't just about the letters. It's about the house. She needs to see where he lived. She needs to see the window he built for her mother. She needs to feel it. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to invite her here," Keanu said. "I'll pay for the flight. I'll pay for a hotel. I'll tell her I found something that belongs to her." He hung up the phone. He looked at the wreck of his house. The water had caused thousands of dollars in damage. It was going to take months to fix. But for the first time since the pipe burst, Keanu smiled. The house wasn't ruined. It was doing its job. After all these years, the house Thomas Blackwell built was finally bringing his daughter home. The water had washed away the walls, but it was building a bridge. 3 weeks had passed since the night the water tried to take the house. The industrial fans were gone, and the deafening hum of the dehumidifiers had been replaced by the quiet sounds of hammers and sanders. The house was in the middle of a transformation. The drywall had been replaced, and the floors were being refinished. The smell of wet mold was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh pine and sawdust. It was a construction zone again, just like it had been 30 years ago when Thomas Blackwell first built it. Keanu stood by the large window in the living room. Looking out at the driveway, he felt a nervous energy in his stomach that he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about a movie premiere or a big interview. It was simpler and much more important than that. A silver sedan pulled into the driveway. It parked slowly, and for a moment nobody moved. Then the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. She was in her 50s, with graying hair tied back in practical bun, and wearing a long coat. She looked around at the house, her guard up, her eyes scanning the property like she was expecting a trap. This was Julia, the daughter from the letters. Keanu opened the front door, just a simple, modern door, nothing heavy or dramatic, and walked out onto the porch. He didn't wave or shout. He just waited. Julia saw him. She hesitated, then grabbed a small bag from the back seat and started walking toward the house. She didn't look like a woman who was excited to be there. She looked like a woman who was doing something difficult because she knew she had to. "Hi," Keanu said when she reached the bottom of the steps. He kept his hands in his pockets, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. "Thanks for coming." Julia looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp, guarded. "You said you found something," she said. Her voice was flat. "You said it belonged to my father." "I did," Keanu said gently. "Please, come inside. It's a bit of a mess, but we're getting there." She followed him into the house. She stopped just inside the threshold, looking around. Her eyes swept over the new drywall, the scaffolding in the corner, and the bare floors. "It looks different," she said quietly. "The last time I was here, everything was dark. The curtains were always drawn. It felt like a cave." Keanu nodded. "I know. I found letters." He wrote about why he kept it dark. He was trying to preserve a memory, but he forgot to let the light in for the people who were still here. He led her through the hallway. "I wanted to show you something before I give you the box," Keanu said. He guided her toward the guest room at the back of the house. He opened the door and stood back. Julia walked in. The room was empty except for a large tarp covering the floor, but the massive window was uncovered. The afternoon sun was pouring through it, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting a golden glow over the empty space. The view of the mountains in the distance was breathtaking. Julia walked slowly to the window. She put her hand on the frame. "He hated this window," she whispered. "He covered it up with boards before I left. He said the view was distracting." Keanu stepped up beside her, but he kept a respectful distance. He wrote in his journal that he built it for your mother. He said she always wanted to see the mountains when she woke up. He covered it up after she died because it hurt too much to look at it without her. Julia stood silent for a long time. She stared out at the peaks in the distance. "She died when I was 10, she said, her voice cracking slightly. "After that, he just checked out. He built this house, but he was never really in it. Not with me." "I think he was trapped," Keanu said softly. "I think he made a mistake. He thought building a monument to her was the same as loving you. He realized it too late." Julia turned to look at him. Her eyes were wet, but she hadn't cried yet. "You read the letters?" "Yes. And he was sorry," Keanu said. "He was heartbreakingly sorry. He wrote that he let you go because he didn't know how to be a father and a grieving widower at the same time. He said you were the only family he had left, and he drove you away." Julia let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 30 years. She looked back out the window. "I have a daughter," she said suddenly. "Her name is Hope. She just had a baby boy." Keanu smiled. He knew about Hope. He wrote about her in the last pages. He said he had a granddaughter he would never meet. That was his punishment, he said. Julia wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "He could have met her," she said. "I never changed my number. I never moved away in a way that he couldn't find me. He just never called." "I know," Keanu said. "I'm not making excuses for him. People get broken, Julia. And sometimes they're so busy trying to fix themselves that they break the people around them. But he didn't forget you. Every beam in this house, every nail. He did it thinking of the family he lost." He led her back to the kitchen. The renovation here was mostly done. The new counters were gleaming. In the center of the room, sitting on the island, was a rusted green metal box. It looked out of place among the modern appliances, a relic from the past. Keanu walked over and slid the box across the counter toward her. This was hidden behind the wall in the basement. The water burst, the wall gave way, and there it was. "I think the house wanted you to have it." Julia looked at the box with a mixture of fear and longing. She reached out and touched the rusted metal. "It's cold." "It's been waiting a long time," Keanu said. He took a step back. "I'll leave you alone for a bit. I'll be on the porch if you need anything." Julia nodded, her eyes fixed on the latch. Keanu walked out, closing the kitchen door gently behind him. He stood on the porch, breathing in the fresh air. The sun was warm on his face. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had done his part. The messenger had delivered the message. He waited for a long time. He listened to the sounds of the birds and the distant traffic. Then he heard it. It wasn't a loud sob, but a quiet, keening sound of grief being let out. It was the sound of a dam breaking. Keanu closed his eyes and stood guard, letting her have her moment of privacy. An hour later, the kitchen door opened. Julia stepped out. She looked tired, but her face was softer. The angry lines around her eyes had smoothed out. She was holding the journal against her chest like a shield. She walked over to where Keanu was leaning against the railing. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "You're welcome," Keanu replied simply. "He wrote about the blue hallway," she said, gesturing to the interior. "He said he painted it blue because of the dress my mother wore to the dance where they met." "He did," Keanu nodded. "I'm going to have him buried," Julia said suddenly. "He was cremated, and I've had his ashes in a closet for 10 years. I didn't know what to do with them, but now I think I'd like to bring him here, just for a little while, to say goodbye properly." Keanu looked at her, surprised. "You can do whatever you want, Julia. It's your father's house. In a way, it's your house." She looked at the building, really looking at it, perhaps for the first time without anger. "No," she said. "It's your house. You saved it. You found him." She paused. "But do you think I could bring Hope back? To see it? Before you sell it?" "I'm not selling it," Keanu said. Julia looked at him, confused. "But the flood, the damage." The damage is just stuff, Keanu said, kicking gently at the porch railing. The house has a soul. I thought I bought a building, but I bought a story. And I think the story is just getting started. A small, genuine smile appeared on Julia's face. It was the first time she had smiled since arriving. That would make him happy, she said. He always wanted the house to be full of life. It will be, Keanu promised. Anytime you want to visit. Anytime Hope wants to see where her grandfather tried to build a fortress for a ghost. The door is open. Julia stepped forward and hugged him. It was a quick, tight hug, the kind shared between two people who have survived a storm together. She picked up her bag and the journal. I'll be back, she said, with Hope. Keanu watched her walk to her car. She got in and started the engine. Before she drove away, she waved out the window. Keanu waved back. As the car disappeared down the road, Keanu turned and looked at the house behind him. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house was still scarred from the water. There were still patches of bare plywood and unpainted drywall. It wasn't perfect, but as the lights inside flickered on, triggered by the timers, he didn't see a disaster. He saw home. The flood had washed away the pain and the secrets that were rotting inside the walls. It had forced the truth out into the open. The house was no longer a monument to a tragic past. It was a place of forgiveness. And for the first time in a long time, the silence inside didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful.